Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Mike Steckline, partner with the Institute for Enterprise Excellence. Today's presentation is hosted by a friend and colleague. We've done previous work in the past, Jason Ewing, and he's got a terrific webinar on an interesting concept, being the hoarders of technology, and he's going to walk us through what that means and how that could help us in our work. Just before we get into the conversation, the phones are going to be muted so as to minimize background noise. I will unmute them later on during the Q&A time. You can always use the chat function to type in some questions if you would like. And this webinar is being recorded so that you can benefit from it later on and share it with others. And those that couldn't participate today can also benefit from hearing the advice that Jason has. So I'm going to turn this over to Jason, and he's going to walk us through his presentation. And Jason, thanks again for doing this for us today.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for the intro there. Well, let's go ahead and get started. This presentation is titled, "We Are Hoarders of Technology." I've done this a number of times and brought some insights, but it is actually a real case study that happened within an organization, and I will glean from some of the examples there to help everybody better understand the context of this viewpoint, which found it very interesting. The executive group of this multi-billion-dollar health system found that they wanted a scorecard built out of this and put on the board report. So I didn't realize that it was that good for them. So I decided to go ahead and share it with other people. So with that, I'll go ahead and jump in, tell you just briefly a little bit about myself. As Mike mentioned, my name is Jason Ewing. I do live in the Idaho area. Some people would hate me and some people love me, but our Boise State Broncos actually have a blue turf field. So, but we do kind of surround ourselves around that in the mountains. And these are some colleagues of mine, my family, and my precious daughter that I love a lot. In the top left, we love to hike and be in the mountains together. So I am also been in healthcare for the last 20 plus years. Mike Steckman and I worked together when we were at Catholic Health Initiatives as a regional CIO for them, and been in various CIO and interesting enough, been on the strategy side of helping health systems develop out their strategic plan. A little bit of a different lens than just a normal tech guy. So hopefully you'll learn a little bit more, and welcome you to reach out, join on LinkedIn. Love to connect with people and learn what you're doing. So what we wanted to do today is I want to go over with you of these objectives, and hopefully I'll hit them for you. The first one is to really level set on the role of an application within an organization. Very misunderstood. And then we'll take a dive in and we'll look at an application portfolio and what that looks like, and we'll start to begin to expose some pretty interesting findings that we had within that, and then also help better understand a roadmap and how do we better manage this now and govern it and get the outcomes and changes that we need in healthcare or any industry. So from a health systems lens, there's been tremendous amount of change that has occurred, and it's really created a lot of complexity within these big health systems when you start bringing a lot of things and folks and organizations together. There's been a kind of a craze around the electronic medical record, getting to a standardized single EMR. The beautiful thing about that is that everybody starts communicating on the same platform and having access to the same standardized information. The downside is it starts lending a little bit less flexibility. Organizations actually now have to start making decisions together, whereas they were able to make them independently. different departments were able to do. So there's some upsides and downsides to that, but the EMR has kind of started to influence how operations begins to function, brings out sometimes their warts and their gaps that they've got, which is a good thing, and it forges new relationships that haven't been there before. I always say this, is that technology is replacing old work and it's creating new work. For many years, physicians would dictate, and then you'd have a set of transcriptionists that would transcribe that and put that into the patient's record. Well, today, there's fewer and fewer transcriptionists today, because the doctors now dictate by voice, and it auto-translates that into a digital format for them to be able to attach it into the record. So there's really no need for the old work of transcriptionists anymore. The other piece of it is that new technology is creating new work. So when things become more electronic, you start creating new work around the data, stuff that wasn't accessible before that is today. And what do we do with that? How do we manage it? How do we know if it's even accurate to give us good business outcomes? And then this fee-for-service model that's been in place for many years is now beginning to compete with the value-based care model. And that whole topic is a beast unto itself, and I'll leave that for another day. But realize that those are two direct opposite models, and it's making it difficult for health systems to work through that and transform themselves. And finally, we've got a lot more consumer demand and expectation for how care is delivered, as well as access to the care, and how we get that. So a lot of complexities, a lot of challenges and changes that are going on. So let's dive in here a little bit. What I do is tie in this concept that we're talking about around application portfolio management. We've got so much technology at our fingertips. Where does that really fit into this whole model of around a work system? So I won't profess to be any sort of expert in this space. I'll leave that to Mike. But I do know that there's a way in which organizations are doing their work. And it's whether it's right, wrong, different, it's the culture, it's the way things happen. Somehow that comes together in a fashion, in a way that delivers some sort of value to the customer, and maybe the reason why the customer comes back. The quote I love from this is, "It's a system that rules them all." And I find that many of these systems are not even really documented. The difference is that there is a whole arena around the support systems that affect or need to enable or connect to that work system. And there's the three dimensions of that, right? Is the alignment component, the enablement component of that work system, and then also to improve the work system continuously. When I think about technology, technology is always changing, and is always changing the way we do things in our personal lives, as well as in that work system environment. So the continuous improvement and new problems many times get solved or influenced by the technology. So technology really becomes kind of what I call this layer in here. It is a support system. And APM stands for the Application Portfolio Management. It's a component. There's many of these things. But once again, how do we connect this to the work system? So as I go through this presentation, I hope that you reference back and think about how we can leverage, build out, and improve our clarity around the application portfolio, that we can better improve the work system. So I'd like to start here we understand the role of an application or technology within an organization. And I want to first start by giving some examples of a framework here. And the first is organizations have capabilities. And these examples here around financial management, care management, population health management, how we manage vendors, how consumers access care, how we collect. All these things become capabilities that an organization has to deliver its services. Underneath the capability are the processes. So this is really kind of the how services are delivered to achieve those capabilities. How a bed is assigned within an organization, how we budget, how supplies are ordered. Many, one or more processes typically make up a capability. The next layer is what I call the application. Those are the software programs, and they do two things. The first thing that they do is they support and automate and drive efficiencies in the processes, okay? And the second thing they do is they collect data and information. And finally, there's what we call the infrastructure, kind of the hardware side of things so that we can pull all that stuff together. The critical piece in all of this is understanding that that application does those two things. They automate processes and they collect data. Many organizations, especially in healthcare, they understand the capabilities within the organization. Then you get into the processes and it becomes kind of sticky, or it becomes kind of nebulous or unsure. Not that people aren't competent in being able to perform their jobs, it's just that this lack of clarity of how to do them consistently across the board and the methodology for continuous improvement. That also means that there's a lot of sometimes hard conversations between departments and areas that have similar processes, and maybe it's even changing who has ownership of those. But so what they do many times is they jump from the capabilities right down to the application layer, looking for a new widget to solve some sort of process or improvement problem that is usually not defined very well. And the burden of that change and that implementation typically will fall onto IT. And so we miss this alignment and this partnership to make those improvements to the processes, because a lot of times the problems on the operational side are not always clear, because maybe the solution isn't really what they think it is. And so there's this relationship that happens between the processes and the applications. So I'm going to reference this relationship through the rest of this presentation, because if the application supports and automates processes, it's probably a really good idea to look at your application portfolio to see all the duplication of systems that carry out the same sort of function, to know how disruptive or how complex your processes are, or lack of standardization thereof. And I'm going to show you some examples of that as we go through this. But when we understand this role of the application within the organization, we better understand now where technology's place is and where's operations' place in making sure that the work system gets the outputs and outcomes that are needed. So this was the case for this organization's need to change the way that they were doing things. So they had fragmented and misunderstood application stewardship, which means it wasn't clear who owned these applications operationally. For example, there were 6 or 8 different reference labs that the lab department across all of the health system was, and everybody was using their own thing. So it wasn't clear from a technology standpoint, what we were really using, and was it important to use 6 or 8 of those things when maybe one was needed, to cut down on those costs that were necessary. But it was difficult to understand, well, who was really responsible for making those types of decisions in the organization, especially when there were a lot of mergers and acquisitions that occurred. There was also a lot of duplicative technology solutions with the same common capabilities. Inherited systems through acquisitions. There was unclear ownership of the applications across the system, which meant that it was unclear who owned and standardized the processes. So when a patient was being registered in one clinic, it was different than the way that a patient was being registered in another clinic. And it was very unclear then what was the practice with the work system, or whether that was even it created the siloed operation of processes for similar business functions. And then on the back end, it really created a lot of confusion with IT in what it should be working on. Because of the disjointedness going on, it was difficult to, who's got priority and who really these processes. Lots of chiefs out there talking about what, but not enough clarity on what's important. So this is the case study of about a $3 billion health system. It had rapid acquisition growth. They had 2 separate divisions they created, 9 hospitals, and 15 to 16,000 employees. So this was a good-sized health system that this case study was really built around. So if you imagine in a meeting with all the top executive leaders of this health system, and I'm going through this presentation, and I asked them, how many applications do you think you own? Which means all of those processes, data that's being collected in different ways, how much? How many? Well, the answer was D, 1,321 systems. So I said that they were quite shocked and surprised by this. So I said, let's take a deeper dive and let's kind of look into the portfolio. So this is the application portfolio for the acute care and diagnostic services areas. Now you'll see this big tall one here, which is 74 applications in IT. What those are, and we have to kind of throw them out, that's like your Microsoft Office and your Adobe Acrobats, just kind of those business productivity things that most people use across the board. But what's very interesting is that when you look over here, there were 27 pharmacy systems. So think about that. Imagine the amount of processes that 27 applications needed to support uniquely and differently. Think about all the data that's being collected in those systems that is done differently. People are calling things one thing, calling things another, and then when we start doing analytics and we want to start gaining some value out of the data, it's all over the board and it's a mess. So it's really kind of your application portfolio becomes reflective of really what your organization is and what it looks like. So I had shared with them, I said, I bet I could walk down to Walgreens and find out that they're not using 27 technologies to run their pharmacies across the country. They had 34 imaging systems. So think about that. If you're a patient and you're in a rural area and you have a broken leg and you have some imaging services done, and then you got to go to an orthopedic doctor that may be in the metropolitan area, and that physician can't get to the x-rays, can't get to the images. So what do? They take more. And that costs the patient, costs the organization, costs the consumption of care costs to go up. All because we can't seem to agree to use one imaging system to move images around. The problem expands even more so when you move out of the health systems and people and patients go to other health systems and they're on different imaging systems. But that's another story another day. But this starts to begin to really kind of bring forward some of the confusion, lack of standardization, and some of the challenges that are being faced by this health system. This was the ambulatory space and revenue cycle, okay? Notice here, they had 38 electronic medical record systems. Think about all those processes and data disruptions and problems that they've got going on there. I like to bring this example out is that in HIM, when they have a request for a medical record, those medical record, we call them the release of information, they have to go into 38 EMRs to try to find all the records of a single patient and do it right and accurate, in addition to going out and finding the paper charts, in order to make sure that the physician that is requesting it has everything that they need to get the best care. So these technologies start to really bring forward some of the breakdowns and challenges and additional inefficiencies that organizations create for themselves that really need to be unwound and re-looked at and fixed so that it can be more of a process improvement driven focus. And then finally, on what I call the business services side, the finance department had 25 different systems to run finance. And I won't even get into all the duplications that are out there. What's interesting is building services over here. People don't think about that, but all those HVAC systems and all the equipment that they use are tied into different systems. So if a HVAC system goes bad and starts, stop pumping out coolant, and it starts pumping heat into a patient's room, that can affect the care of the patient, not only their discomfort, and how do they get alerted and know? Typically, those systems are all tied back to computer systems that then alert on-call staff to be able to mitigate those problems much quicker and much faster. Once again, back into the process. They had 14 of them across the 9 different hospitals. So let me share just 2 very simple, interesting findings. So some people have and some people have not heard of Razor's Edge before. But what Razor's Edge is it's a software program that is built out to house and support multiple foundation programs, manage donors. This organization had 5 instances of the same program, Razor's Edge, for their foundations, of which they had 6 of them. So they were shelling out thousands and thousands of dollars because they couldn't come to agreement as foundation systems to manage donors in a standardized, templated way. And so every year they had to expend monies for that customization and having those systems upgraded independently. It's kind of sad to see, but difficult. But it was an expense they didn't see and they didn't have visibility on, and they didn't realize that the processes and the way they did things were all over the board. The second was, I was really proud that they had one performance management system across the health system. It was called Halogen. Now, this was great news, but if you remember at the beginning when I articulated out this health system had 2 divisions. So they would use one performance management system, but the East region, they did their employee annual reviews on an annual basis. So every October, they would start through that process. The West region, the way that they handled their processes were that they wanted to, they did them on the anniversary of the employee's hire date. So what happens now is that they had 2 full-time employees in the background tweaking that halogen system on a regular basis just so that they could accommodate those 2 different styles of when they did employee employee reviews. So operationally, it brought out the processes of, they were too complex and they couldn't kind of come to the agreement and the decisions to work together on one way of doing it. But those are costs to the organization to do that. These executives had no idea that that's what was going on. They had migrated and moved to an Epic application, which is a very large, costly medical record. So shutting down all of those 38 EMRs and going to a single EMR was a fantastic move on their part. But you can see here on the left all the different systems that they had just in the phase 1 story. And so think about the processes now as they went to a single one that now forced operations to start figuring out how they're going to intake a patient and how they're going to do it right. I had one health system, and it wasn't this one, that they wanted to do a smoking cessation assessment during the intake process of a patient and never communicated with the rest of the organization. It was told, IT was told to enable that into their workflow, their technology workflow, and all of a sudden it changed it for 80 other clinics out there. Now all of a sudden that disruption to those processes just blew up. People came in the next day wondering what in the heck happened and why are they doing this now? All because there was one clinic that wanted to do something and they didn't communicate and collaborate across the board to have agreements that this is how we're going to do it, train the workforce, and then move forward with the change that was necessary and explain the why. So that's a great example of how sometimes technology really can impact processes. So in the phase 2, there was a whole other slew of systems that went away. When I say went away, they still stayed out there running because they had the data, but it forced more changes in their processes. In total, there was 159 applications that went away. People used to doing things that they were in these old systems, now happening to learn a new way, created an enormous amount of change management, people change and process change that wasn't there before, forged those new relationships that hadn't existed before. So when we looked at that and we broke that down even further, of those 159 systems, we start looking at how many of them contained clinical data, and what do we want to do with that data. So I'll take a pause here for a second. This is when, during this presentation, that the chief medical officer raised up and said, Jason, we are hoarders of technology. And that statement never left me. And that's why I titled the presentation the way I did. And he proceeded forward and said, Jason, why don't you just go in and shut these systems down? And I said, well, we can. I can go into the data centers and I can have my guys hit the button and we'll shut them off. But what are you going to do with your data? You have to retain that. How are you going to look up old patient information when you need it? What do you want to do with that? And then the second is the processes that you're going to impact. People knowing that, hey, I can go here and get this, or hey, I do it out of this system. You're going to affect all those processes. Now, if you want me to go in and hit the button, I can do that, but you just need to be prepared for the chaos that's going to come from all your operational areas because of that. And he goes, oh, didn't think about that. So it's really critical And I go back to Mike Steckline and company around how do we connect and impact that work system. We've got to be careful with it, and we got to make sure that we're impacting and connecting it appropriately from those support systems. So I moved into the cost side of things with them. I had asked the question to them. I said, how much money do you think you'll spend just on application maintenance? Not the labor, not the capital, but just the annual fees. And many of them had articulated, well, it would be A, or we spend B just on that. I said the actual answer is this. A was in 2011, B was 2012, on up to 2016. Because when you look at this, in 5 years, your appetite for technology doubled, went from 15 million to 30 million, projected out that you would be in another 5 years by 2020 at $60 million in your application cost. Now, think about that growth in application also means growth in complexities of processes or lack of thereof. And they were just floored by that. So then I said, we've got to figure out a way in which we turn the corner to reduce the cost of your application portfolio, but also start standardizing how people do work. So this is what leads into how we manage these applications. And it's not just IT managing them. In fact, what I typically do is provide the transparency and visibility to the portfolios to those departments and areas and start asking the questions around because they impact their processes and their reporting and their data, working together with them on how do we bring this stuff together and how do we work in a more cohesive way, and what do you want to do with these things and when do you want to do them, because we can help. So that really leads to what we put together is really a rationalization timeline and putting in governance to help govern and manage and make the right decisions by the right folks. Many organizations think that the technology belongs to IT, and I argue that because 98% of the technology that is in healthcare organizations or any organization is not needed to run IT. I do not need a lab system to run IT. Lab needs a lab system because it affects their processes and automates their stuff. So when we start to understand that perspective, we begin to realize that IT is an enabler to that work system. And IT is there to help and assist and drive. Now, that doesn't mean that IT isn't always put in that position to drive the operations when it becomes very frustrating. But that's where IT needs to figure out its place within the organization as enablements of operation. So when we put governance in to govern IT, what we're really saying is that we're governing our operations. IT is just one component of that. So when I put in governance and work with others, I get the process owners involved, and this is what I give them to manage and govern. IT will provide the transparency, the stewardship, do all the technical geeky things that we need to do. But when it comes to decision making around this, it affects the operations. It's critical that they're at the table making those decisions and communicating those things out. You'll see the red line, the red arrows here. I do not like, I love Mike Steckline's and their approach to flavors of the month versus more of a sustainable model. These things here are sustainable approaches. So you never go and do everything at one time. You take one or two of these until you can mature it and it becomes a way in which the culture adopts and uses it. Then you start adding more things in till you get to a state where, hey, this is just how we work. And I can't believe that we used to work the other way. And so I like to drop bits and pieces of this this governance of the technology, which is really governing their operations. I won't go into detail around this, but this is really kind of a small framework around application portfolio management, one piece of that. But it helps articulate and drive standards out. It drives out what systems are going to move out of the organization, how often it needs to be upgraded. And then I think a real critical piece here is the risk. You know, gosh, if that thing went down, what would that do to our processes and our operations? How at risk is it? And then I also like the value realization. Is that software giving us the operational value that we need to deliver services that we do to the customer or the consumer? If not, then maybe we need to look at changing that because we're not getting out of it what we thought we were supposed to get out. So that wraps us up here to the end of this. Mike, maybe you want to open it up if there's some questions people might have, maybe comments that they've got, whatnot.
Great. Thanks, Jason. I have unmuted the phones if people would like to ask some questions, and you can also use the chat function to type things in if you'd like. So I'll pause here and see what people would like to say or ask.
Mike, this is Jeff Hunter.
Hey, Jeff.
This question it's really minor in the scheme of things. And it's a question for both you and Jason. But when sometimes I'm talking with an organization that's relatively new into strategy deployment, they're being bombarded by requests to have an application for strategy deployment, if you will, some type of system that is going to replace kind of the visual management system or augment the visual management system. And I was just wondering what your perspective is on that, both Mike and Jason. What your perspective is.
Do you want me to take that first, Mike?
Absolutely.
So it's real simple to me, and it's a great question, but very simple because I've seen it before. Technology is not a strategy. And the reason being is, and when I say a strategy, it's not a business strategy, unless you're into the software business. So technologies are just tools. They're wrenches, they're hammers, they're, those types of things that enable some sort of operational advancement, some sort of operational strategy. I had one health system that said that their electronic medical record is their strategy. And I said, well, help me understand that. We'll put something in, but is it going to achieve some sort of outcome that you're willing to put $110 million worth of investment into? Are you trying to achieve some sort of by putting that technology in place? So back to that earlier slide that I had, people will jump right to the technology and then they'll call that a strategy because it's something that's in their mind that they haven't tangibly been able to articulate operationally or organization-wide. I think it's a very foolish mistake to lead with technology as your strategy when it's an enabler. That's my perspective on it. It's what I've seen.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know what else I would add other than I think about Dr. Deming's advice. He said there's no substitute for knowledge, and there's also no substitute for people trying to come to agreement. And it's challenging, I think, to think that we can find a algorithm or a app that would substitute for the need for people to decide what are the most important things we need to do to try to Jeff, in your terms, play to win. And what would that look like? I suppose as people develop something, there may be some methodology that could help to facilitate that and coordinate that. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, but also any thoughts of others that might be on today's webinar.
So one other quick point to that too is that, and it could be as simple as this, is that is your strategy to put in an email system, or is your strategy to put in an improved communication system?
Mm-hmm.
So if you lead with, I'm going to use email as my strategy, you're missing it. The email system enables improved communication.
I think those are, really great examples. What I had to learn early on is that I had to change my whole way of thinking about how I created value. And so I would have deferred back to some kind of technology solution that would have allowed me to sit in my office, as opposed to change how I lead by getting out of my office, getting to the Gemba, and using visual management as a way of connecting with people. And so when I get asked that question, my suggestion is that, start with the behaviors, don't start with the technology. In fact, defer that technology and really think that you've changed your behaviors and changed the systems and processes behind them. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that.
I was at a summit that I was on a panel with post-acute care and acute care, mostly made up of C-suite folks. And I'd asked the question, is technology leading healthcare, or is your healthcare operations leading technology? And 10 out of 10, the technology was pushing and leading their operations. And, I think we're missing it when we don't reverse that, and like you were saying.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge and something that we see in a lot of arenas. Some thoughts I had as you were going through this, Jason, I was thinking about when people think about, well, we need to do some 5S, we need to identify and remove the waste. I think sometimes they think about the implications for the technology system, but that isn't always the case. So I think that's an interesting aspect that needs to be thought of. This notion of standardization, I think, is often misunderstood. I don't think the purpose of standardization is to achieve uniformity. That may sound heretical. I think the purpose of standardization is to figure out what's our basis for improvement. And you had some good illustrations there about what improvement's got to look like. You have to have some sort of systems that's going to manage or minimize the geometric growth of the cost and complexity. And again, going back to the advice of Dr. Deming, a system will not manage itself. And the management of that system, I think, is a combination of the people that are in the IT arena, but also the people in operations. They've got to do it together. I liked the example of, here's the one clinic that made one decision that made sense for them and the smoking cessation, and they didn't realize the unintended consequences of what might happen to others. It's a good example of when we don't think systemically, which is one of the guiding principles. And there was another thought here. I already mentioned no system is going to manage itself. So man-made systems, it's interesting if we asked ourselves, so how many apps do I have running on my phone, and how many apps do I have on my computer, and do I know what they're all doing, and how many do I really need? I mean, it isn't just always something that you can think from an organizational perspective. Each of us as human beings, as we use technology, probably have our own questions to ask about, is it driving us or are we driving it? And that question about technology driving our behaviors, just stand around and watch people, and anywhere where people are together, and notice how many people are fidgeting with their phone and looking at stuff, and what are they doing? And I think that it's a valid question to ask, is what's driving what.
Hey, Mike, I've got an interesting example of that. Is just before the holidays, I went out and bought these, what they call smart outlets. They're little plug-ins that plug into your wall outlet.
Mm-hmm.
And I 6 of these things, and I can actually turn them on and off on my phone anywhere in the world as long as I have an internet connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I got myself caught up thinking, oh my goodness, what a great, I'm going to plug those things in, and if my lamps or things like that are left on, I can see it and I can shut them off wherever I'm at, save some electricity and see how much consumption I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all those 6, guess how many I used? And I put it in my garage because I had Christmas lights that were on my house that I was able to, my wife likes to have them on all the time, so I was able to set a timer on those to go off at 11 at night when she was in bed and come on the next day when, it was starting to get dark. But the thing was, the rest of them sat there on my desk.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, I did not look at, well, what problems were I trying to solve? I just got caught up in the fact that it was a cool widget.
Yeah. It's a good lesson. And it kind of goes back to what kind of waste have we built into our lives, and have we developed an eye toward looking for and removing all of the waste? So it's definitely more things to dig into and to learn more about. I'll pause to see if anyone else has any questions or comments for Jason. Okay, Jason, that was wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time to put this together. You can see Jason's contact information is on there and how you can reach out to him and learn more about what he's doing. And as we go down the pathway, I'm sure there'll be more opportunities for some collaboration on some learning webinars around this. I don't think we're done yet in this arena. As far as what happens next, if you go to our website, you can find our webinars page. You can see that the current event will be moved into the previous events, and you'll be able to track those and also get the recording. Anybody that participated today that's on our distribution list will get a link to the recording if you want to use it or share it with others. Coming next in March, I want to start a discussion, and it's part 1 on managing for daily improvement as a system. And this is also a white paper that we're currently writing to talk about a strategy deployment system is what we talked about last time for a white paper. How do you develop and deploy strategy in a complementary system around the managing for daily improvement? And we'll continue that conversation in March on the 15th of March. And in May, Didier Rubino is going to give a presentation on frontline leader standard work. And if I just go briefly back to that slide, looking at standard work as the system, at least it's a way to think about this, the standard work that we do, how people have personal standard work and people that work together have agreed upon current best ways they do things, standard work. And Didier is going to talk about the frontline worker, the frontline leader, and their standard work. And a number of topics that are in the works. I'm just making a running list here. This is how it started with Jason when he said, hey, would you be interested in this topic? And I said, yeah, let's find a date and time and let's do this. So a number of people have said, yeah, here's some interesting topics. And so you'll see these as people further develop their ideas and their presentations. You'll see those coming out as people have those presentations developed, and it'll show up on our website and also in a distribution email that we have. I mentioned white papers. So we did the Pracademics Guide to Strategy Deployment, the last white paper, and I want to do 2 white papers simultaneously. I'm starting with the Managing for Daily Improvement system, but I also want to do that in conjunction with the Leader Standard Work system. So these are going to be 2 interactive white papers. And so just briefly to describe what that means, the last white paper we did, the Pracademic Guide for Strategy Deployment, is the link to that. If you want to go get the latest copy of that, you can see that system helps to prepare the organization for future this is shown in the ideal world, the percentage of time people would be spending on this in the various roles as it relates to meeting the needs of customers. What are the key things people would be doing in those roles is shown here. The system that I want to address next in a white paper is, so what is being done? What's the managing for daily improvement system to handle the problems of today? And how do you work on that? And what are the key high-level roles that you can describe what people are going to be doing in that system? And then this space in the middle that I referred, a person that's a manager of people is going to have their standard work, how they each do their work, and then how they do their work together. And then there's people that are at the front line meeting the needs of the customers directly. That's a little different. It's something that more people have got to get agreement about what's the current best way that we do that work. That's why you see that a little bit broader in that perspective. And the ideal world, I think, would be kind of a 50-50 split, but in the current world, most people would fess up and say that we would like to spend time, as we should, in strategy. The leaders would say that, but their line is somewhere up toward the upper left-hand corner, so we have to figure out what we're going to do about that. And so these are going to be the areas of focus for the next 2 white papers we're going to be working on. And oh, by the way, if anyone wants to participate in helping to develop those white papers, I'll be making that pitch at the March webinar. But I'm always open for input from others. The people that are doing the work every day have got the most important benefit about how this really works in their real life. We're also doing something, just calling it Principle of the Month. If you go to our blog page, you can see the blog posts that we have, taking the year of January of 2019 and month by month, taking a Principle of the Month and devoting that time. If you use LinkedIn, you can follow along on LinkedIn, so the same posts are being posted on LinkedIn. In January, we did 5, roughly 1 per week, and you can go to those bit.ly links either on the blog or LinkedIn to learn about what we were presenting there. And also with a blog, of course, people can respond and give their perspective and write in, which is all great. In February, we picked the principle of respect every individual. So going around, we started with a line principle. This is going to be an enable principle, and we're going to be working on that. And then just finally, as a wrap-up, just as with Jason, he had a perspective he wanted to share, and I appreciate him taking the time to do that. And if anyone else would like to present a story, or if there's a story you would like to share, just contact me at that email address, and you'll have a chance to share and learn with each other. So Jason, again, thank you for your time. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's good to reconnect with you. And I hope that everyone has a good day and a good weekend. And I'm in the Minneapolis area, and it was minus 10 below 10 this morning. So maybe other parts of the country are a little warmer, but I guess spring is going to be just around the corner. So hope everyone has a good day, and thanks again for participating.